Hey everyone, I'm Mariana, and today it is wrap up time again. So I'm going to be telling you about everything I watched in April. April was an interesting month for me. I can't say that I watched a ton of stuff, but everything that I watched was kind of unusual and interesting, even though I can't say that I discovered any amazing new all-time favorites, except for maybe one thing. We'll get to that in a minute. I still am glad that I watched everything that I watched. I don't feel like any of this was a waste of time or anything, and let's get started with the series. First up, I saw a bunch of people on my feed watching Unorthodox on Netflix, and I decided to give it a try because it seemed interesting. This is based on an autobiography, so it is inspired by a true story, even though it doesn't completely follow it, but it is a story of a young Jewish woman who is brought up in an ultra-Orthodox community in Brooklyn, New York, and decides to escape her unhappy marriage and unhappy life in search of something more. This type of story of someone searching for themselves, trying to find their own voice, is something that I always respond to. So I decided to give it a try. I thought it's only 4 episodes, so why not watch at least one? Next thing I knew, I binged all 4 in one day, which does not happen to me that often anymore. This is how into this miniseries I was. I would absolutely recommend it to almost anyone. If you're a fan of inspiring personal stories, definitely check this one out. Is it flawless? No, it's not. You might be already aware of the criticisms of this miniseries, how it portrays the Jewish community and how it is kind of a one-sided story. However, something to keep in mind is that it is a personal experience, and it is based in a very specific community, in a very specific family. So it's obviously not meant to be a broad brushstroke painting Orthodox Jewish communities, and I think a lot of people forget that it's just one person's experience. And Shira Haas, who plays the lead character, Esty, is so perfect for this role. She is phenomenal. I absolutely loved her in this. We do also have some interesting secondary characters, but they are a little bit underdeveloped. That is one area that the show could have improved in and probably could have used more episodes, because some of these secondary characters are definitely deserving of more exploration. But as is, Esty's story is absolutely insane and is fascinating and inspiring in many ways. I ended up giving it an 8 out of 10. I almost gave it a 9 out of 10 because it did really affect me emotionally, but I think an 8 out of 10 is a very solid rating for this miniseries. I also finally finished The Outsider, and I am so glad I went back to that series because it is so good. It turns out that I paused at a very transitional, slow episode because once I got past that episode, things just got crazy and so interesting. So I would definitely recommend it. If you don't know what it's about, it is based on a novel by Stephen King, and the premise is that you have a pretty straightforward crime that really implicates one specific person, except for it seems like this person was also at a different location at the same time. And that is as far as I'm going to take this premise, because you get to figure out what is happening here. Is there something shady? Is there some kind of conspiracy? Is there something supernatural? It is definitely a mystery thriller series that is worth your attention, and it does work better when you binge it versus watching it episode to episode once a week. We have Ben Mendelsohn here as the lead investigator, and he is kind of this broken, dark character. Loved his work in this series. Also, Cynthia Erivo shows up a few episodes in as somebody called Holly Gibney, and she was definitely my favorite character. She is great. It's a very moody looking show if you're into that. It's very dark and ominous in tone. It is well paced except for, I believe, episodes 4 and 5. Or 5 and 6. I think it's 4 and 5. There are 2 episodes in the middle of the show, which is where I stopped watching, that are on the slower side and they're very transitional and not much happens. But once you get past those, things get really, really interesting. And the beginning of the show is fascinating. What I'm saying is don't let the middle of the show where things get a little bit slower discourage you from continuing. I will warn you that this does get quite disturbing in its content. Specifically, the initial crime is just so awful. You just don't want to see anything like that. So, just be prepared for that. But overall, it is not gratuitous in any way, and it doesn't continue throwing these awful images at you throughout the show. There are definitely more horror elements throughout the show. It's not just the beginning. However, it is not something that is going to keep throwing gore and just dark, awful stuff at you every episode, every 10 minutes. I ended up giving The Outsider an 8 out of 10 as well. Would obviously recommend it to anyone looking for a dark mystery thriller. And I know they're not going to have a season 2 of this, but I would love to see more Stephen King adaptations like this and more series like this in general, particularly because I actually do think this was better than the novel. Finally, the last series that I finished in April was Devs. You guys recommended it to me over and over again in my last wrap-up video, and I already did have an interest in this because it is written and directed by Alex Garland, whom I absolutely love. So yes, I finally watched Devs, and this is the favorite of the month for me. This is absolutely the best thing I watched in April, and it blew my mind in every way. This is a sci-fi miniseries, and it is best to go into this knowing as little as possible. So I don't want to tell you much about the plot. I will say that there is a tech company involved with a very mysterious division, and once you start peeling off the layers of what's going on there and trying to figure out what they're actually doing, it's worth it. It's worth the discovery. So don't look anything up about this. Just go into it and let it take you on its journey. If you've seen Alex Garland's movies before, if you've seen Annihilation, if you've seen Ex Machina, or some of the films that he just wrote and didn't direct, you will know exactly the type of sci-fi we're going for here. I loved it. It is something that's just going to be a mindfuck, and you're going to enjoy every moment of it. This is also something that I would absolutely rewatch, which is not something I say often about series. I'm not somebody who rewatches series all that much. I can probably name like 3 that I've rewatched from beginning to end. This is one that I would actually rewatch. First of all, because it's amazing, and second, because there is so much going on under the surface here. And it does leave you with some questions at the end that you might be able to figure out on a second viewing. Beautiful cinematography, just perfect for the tone and mood they're going for. I loved the way they approached the sci-fi angle that they were working with. I loved the themes. I loved what it questions. Really good cast, really good writing. It is a little bit on the slower side, but for this type of sci-fi, that's what you want it to be. You cannot have this type of sci-fi be action-packed. It just would not work. So I was a huge fan of this series. I ended up rating it a 9 out of 10. The only reason it didn't get to 10 out of 10 for me was that there were some things at the end that I was not so sure about. I feel like they made some logic jumps or created some plot holes potentially. Nothing too major, but they just didn't stick the landing as much as I wanted them to. And it is a difficult ending to pull off. So I totally get it. And it's not like it's a bad ending in any way, but I could have used one more episode to explore things a little bit further. That's where I'm going to leave this. Definitely watch Devs. If you have similar tastes to me when it comes to sci-fi, you are going to love this. I just know you are. So check it out if you haven't yet. As for what I'm currently watching, I am all in on Black Mirror at the moment, which seems like an odd choice because who wants to watch depressing episodes of Black Mirror at the moment. Apparently I do. It's working for me and I absolutely love it. I'm glad I finally jumped on that bandwagon. If you follow me on Letterboxd, which you should, if you don't, I am Impression Blend on there. You might have noticed that my entire diary for the month of May, as for what I'm watching, is consisting of Black Mirror episodes, and I will definitely do a video once I finish Black Mirror. I will probably do either my top 5 episodes or a full ranking of every episode of Black Mirror. Let me know in the comments which one would you prefer. So yeah, that's going well. And if I keep looking down my phone from now on, it's because I'm going to be looking at what I watched in April on Letterboxd. So let's get into the movies that I watched in April. And I did not watch that many because, as you can tell, I was kind of focused on series, which does not happen that often to me, but that's the kind of month April was. And the first film that I watched on April 1st was The Platform. This came out on Netflix at the end of March. A lot of people were buzzing about it, and if you haven't seen it yet, it's still on Netflix. It's going to be there for a while, I'm assuming. It is a science fiction horror thriller. It's definitely one of those concept type movies because the premise is you have this structure with many, many levels, and on each level there are 2 people. Every day from the top of this structure, referred to as the whole, there is a platform that comes down with a bunch of food on it. And if everybody just took what was enough for them, there would be enough food for every level, even to go deep to the very, very low levels. You find out eventually how many levels are there. It is very allegoric, as you can tell, and it has a lot of social commentary. There is kind of a underlying theme that you can guess right away just from the premise, but there are also different things that come up throughout that kind of concern our society and specific people within it as you get through the levels of this structure. It is a very, very interesting premise. I really loved the idea of this whole thing and the social commentary that they went for. However, I thought the execution was a little bit lacking here. Not even a little bit in some parts. And the ending, I was not a fan of how they brought it together in the end. I don't feel like they did, to be honest. It feels super appropriate and timely for the days that we're living in right now, so I would recommend it, but for me, this ended up being a 6 out of 10. It's definitely worth watching once, and I'm glad that I watched it because I did find it interesting, but in the end, I thought there was a lot there that needed some work. Then I watched The Student, which is a Russian film that is also quite concept-based. This is about a high school student who becomes kind of obsessed with the teachings of the Bible because he's convinced the world is going to shit and we are just approaching evil on all accounts. So he decides to take the teachings of the Bible very, very literally and decides to try to change how things are in his school and around him in general by using the teachings of the Bible. As I was watching this, I just could not stop wondering how many people were quite upset by this film because it seems like something that would be very controversial. It is a very interesting think piece and I think it is absolutely worth watching. I ended up giving it an 8 out of 10. I would recommend it. I do believe it's on Amazon Prime right now, so you can find it pretty easily if you have that. However, be prepared for those controversial moral and ethical questions. And there is a lot to unpack there. I don't really want to say any more because things kind of escalate, as you can imagine, and I don't want to tell you where it's headed. But if you are down for some religion versus modern world stuff, you should definitely watch this one. Then I watched another Russian movie. This one is called Why Don't You Just Die? And this is pretty ridiculous. It's meant to be ridiculous, but I'm going to tell you right away, this was not for me. I can see how people would enjoy this one, but me personally, even though I ended up giving it a 6 out of 10 because it did have a lot of style and it really stuck to it, It's not my kind of movie. The premise is that a young woman hires her boyfriend to go and kill her father. But when he arrives to do this thing, it turns out that it's not that easy. How do I explain this movie to you? Imagine a ridiculous Tarantino ending, like the massacre type of Tarantino ending. And then make that very, very vibrant, very colorful, very kind of saturated looking, an entire film of that. This kind of sounds like fun, doesn't it? And I am absolutely sure that there are people for whom this is awesome, awesome entertainment. I can totally understand that point of view, but it was not that for me. I thought it was a little bit much. Obviously, this film does not concern itself with realism or is meant to be taken seriously. It is supposed to be over the top. It's supposed to be funny. It's supposed to be lighthearted, but super violent and gory. And that's what it is. And if that's your thing, you're going to love it. For me, I just need a little bit more from my movies, but I did enjoy it on some level because it really committed to its style. As I mentioned, I did end up giving it a 6 out of 10 because I enjoyed it on some level. It did make me smile because of just how ridiculous it was. And some of this was absolutely insane, but just don't go into it expecting it to make a ton of sense or expecting great writing or great plot. This is meant to be what it is, and it's meant to be kind of style over substance in every way possible, and crazy action and crazy gore. So there was that. Then, for something completely different, I watched Monos. It is on Hulu right now, and I heard a lot about this film. It is about 8 teenagers with guns who are watching over a hostage and are essentially a guerrilla type group. It is a gorgeously shot film, and it is very obviously inspired by things like Lord of the Flies and Apocalypse Now. However, for me, I just did not love it as much as I wanted to. I think part of it was that I am not super familiar with Colombian politics and the way things are there, so I think maybe a lot of it kind of went over my head. But as somebody with an outsider view, so to speak, I just was left with a lot of questions as far as why was anything happening in this film and why people were doing the things that they were doing and what was the point of all of this. I read up on it a little bit after watching the film. It did make me want to figure out what is this all about, and it did make it a little bit more understandable for me, but overall still did not love this film. Wish it was a little bit more kind of outsider friendly, so to speak. It's not the job of the director to dumb it down for me in any way, but from my perspective and from my enjoyment, this was a 6 out of 10 for me. I did not love it. I appreciated what it was going for. I appreciated the craftsmanship and everything that went into it and the way everything was done. It is beautiful the way it's shot, but the storytelling and the characterization just was not there for me, at least not in a way where it worked. Then, and I'm probably going to get some comments about this because you guys are going to be like, what? You liked this movie but not Monos? Come on, girl. But, you know, it is what it is. I watched Perfect Sense, which is a film nobody ever talks about. I don't even know how I stumbled upon it. I think I just watched it because I saw Ewan McGregor and Eva Green, and I thought this is a movie I should be watching. And the premise is those two are falling in love in the midst of a very mysterious pandemic. So that felt like an appropriate movie to watch. And I actually thought it was really good. It is very underrated. I don't think it's a perfect film. I don't think it's Oscar worthy or anything, but it is a very heartfelt film with a point of view, with wonderful leads, and with an interesting message. And it can be a little bit cheesy, but I think it works, and I think a lot of people would enjoy it. Plus, who doesn't want to watch Ewan McGregor and Ava Green fall in love. I mean, come on. I responded really well to it for some reason, which is kind of weird considering that it is heavier on the romance than what I normally prefer. But as far as pandemic romance goes, I don't know if this is a subgenre that exists. Are there more movies like this? I don't know. But it was really good. I ended up giving it an 8 out of 10, and I would absolutely watch it again and recommend it to other people. I think it is one of the most underrated movies that I have discovered in the past few months. Then I watched Villains, which is a film that came out last year. It flew under the radar for sure. I've only seen a few people talking about it, but it is starring Bill Skarsgård and Micah Monroe, and they are two kind of very unfortunate protagonists. They're not the smartest people out there. They are on the run after committing a crime, and they break into this house not knowing that this is going to create a lot more problems for them than they thought because of what they find there and because of who the owners are. This movie gets a little crazy. I thought this was good enough to watch once. It has a very charismatic cast, and that is what keeps you watching for the most part. It is entertaining in some parts. It's not like crazy amounts of fun or anything like that. The writing just isn't there to push it to the next level, but it is entertaining enough. It keeps you watching. It keeps you interested in how this is going to end. Are they going to get out of this? Are they not going to get out of this? How it's going to go down? You know it's going to come to a head and get absolutely out of control. But it's not the most amazing film out there. I will say though, Bill Skarsgård, who also is Pennywise, as a lot of you may know him, needs to do a lot more comedic roles because I did not expect that type of performance from him, and I would love to see more stuff like that. Just better quality, if you know what I mean. I ended up giving this film a 6 out of 10. I don't see myself watching this again, and I wouldn't recommend it to too many people, but I was entertained as I was watching, so it's good enough to watch once. Finally, the last film that I watched in April was Extraction, which was a Netflix release. I think I watched it either the day it came out or the day after. It's an action thriller starring Chris Hemsworth, so I thought, why not? As you may suspect from the title, this film is about a mercenary who embarks on a dangerous mission. The mercenary is obviously played by Chris Hemsworth, and this goes all kinds of wrong. What kind of movie would this be if everything went according to plan, right? Here's what I'm going to say about this. If you are a fan of this subgenre of films, action movies, thrillers about people going to extract other people with dangerous circumstances and things blowing up and people chasing each other, if you are into that, I think you will enjoy this quite a bit. However, if you're just kind of trying to watch a random good action thriller, I don't know if this is going to be your movie. I ended up giving this one a 7 out of 10 simply because after a pretty rocky start, I thought this was not going well at all. The movie somehow turned itself around and really picked up. There is a brilliant long take in this film, which is right about the 30-minute mark, right when this movie picks up. And a lot of people are talking about that being the best part of the film, which it is. But after that part happens, things suddenly get a lot more interesting. So I got really invested in these characters. For some reason, I got really invested in how this was going to end, what was going to happen. So, that's why I ended up giving it a 7 out of 10. Definitely a higher rating than I thought I was going to give it initially. I will say that now that some time has passed, I watched it when? April 27th. It's kind of going down in rating in my mind. I think the more appropriate rating would be a 6 out of 10 because it's not really staying with me. It's not really something I would watch again. But right when I finished it, I was pretty pleasantly surprised by it. So I'm going to leave it at a 7 out of 10 just on a first impression. But I think it is closer to a 6 out of 10, unless you're a big fan of this genre. So that's it for everything that I watched in April. As you can tell, my series watching was a lot more successful than my film watching. I would love to know what you watched in April and what were your favorite films and series that you finished last month. And also, what are you watching right now? Are you watching anything good? Have you seen a really great film recently? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. As always, a very special thank you to all of my patrons and an extra special thank you to the patrons whose names are on the screen right now, but also just a general huge thank you to everyone who made it to the end of this video. If you guys enjoyed this wrap up, which I hope you did, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, share it, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, follow me on social media. All of the links are going to be in the info box below, and I hope you're having a great day. I hope you're staying safe and sane, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Bye.